Hello, Internet. Evan Benton of Dog for Mayor here. It's been a long time since I've made a video, but it looks like we're all going to have a lot of time on our hands, so I thought I'd weigh in on the current COVID-19 slash NCOV2 slash coronavirus pandemic. So, just to state my position, I am of the opinion that it is a bioweapon. I don't know who it was developed by, but it's not a natural disease. Well, at some point it could have been. I am also of the opinion that it is a distraction from some other event, most likely the financial reset that you've heard people talk about. However, I want to stress that just because it is a distraction, that doesn't mean that the deaths aren't real. The deaths are very, very real. This is definitely something people need to take seriously with sheltering in place and etc. I think that everyone who is memeing and telling jokes about this is going to feel very sheepish in the next several months as the numbers start to roll in. So, a little introduction for myself. Why should you listen to me? I am a licensed massage therapist, which I have been for 10 years, and that doesn't really give me any accreditation to talk about epidemiology, but I've been reflecting recently on the fact that over the course of my career, I have people come to me with what are called idiopathic diseases. So an idiopathic diseases mean idio means it's its own cause, and so that means doctors don't know what it is. So I have people come to me with something doctors can't explain, and they say, "What can you do?" So I just look it up, and I just end up learning a lot about mainly autoimmune conditions. But it seems to me lately that so many of these so-called autoimmune conditions are really some form of infection. And I'm not going to get into that because I might get this video flagged. But all of that has essentially culminated for me in marrying a lovely woman who unfortunately was diagnosed at the age of 8 with Lyme disease, which is another one of these, not idiopathic diseases, but it's something that the CDC basically is of two minds about on whether or not it actually is a valid condition. So basically, I've just read a ton, and I'm working with people who are afflicted with the whole gamut of different things, and just seeing what kind of works and what doesn't. I'm not going to talk about really what works, and I'm not recommending massage therapy for really any of these conditions. I'm also not offering medical advice, so nothing that I am saying here is to be misconstrued that way. I'm basically just a guy who reads a lot of books. Alright, so in this video is just going to be me talking. I've got a little outline here, and I'm just going to go over it. I'm probably not going to do any cuts, so we'll see how this goes. Alright, so I have, one second. First of all, if you're reading online, do yourself a favor and print what you're looking at out. So I've got a nice laser printer. I don't recommend looking at the computer screen for that long because that can be hard on your eyeballs. So I've got lots of these, just studies and papers and whatnot. Then beyond that, I'm going to go into some actual sources here that I've read before I get into my thoughts. So, yes, we're dealing with germ warfare. We are in the age of germ warfare. If you want to kill a bunch of people, you're going to use germ warfare. Nuclear is far too expensive. Pound for pound, bang for your buck, you're going to kill more people with a tiny amount of microorganisms than you are with a large amount of nuclear material. And that's been going on for a very long time. The first documented instance of germ warfare was in 1344, the siege of Kaffa, and that's where they did the thing where they took bodies and catapulted them over the walls of a castle to infect the people inside. And I'll note they didn't know how that worked. They just knew basically that it was effective. They could catapult something yucky, and it would hurt people. So, and it's been going on much longer than that. If you look it up on Wikipedia, you'll see, they refer to the ancient Greeks putting bodies in wells and things like that. So my first little selection here is Pox Americana, the Great Smallpox Epidemic of 1775 to 1782. The author is Elizabeth A. Fenn. So this is about the use of germ warfare during the American Revolution. It's very, very interesting. People are familiar with the Winter at Valley Forge. The Winter at Valley Forge was a camp where they inoculated people against the because germ warfare is a lot more than just infecting people with a disease to cause the disease. It's also, in this case, it's a question of, do they have the pox yet? Because if they don't, then that's a great weapon. We can just kill them just by walking through their towns. We can kill their wives and their children. However, if they have had the pox, if that's run through their population, then that's not going to do anything. So that's a very interesting, very important strategic question for military officers. And we're looking at that as far back as 1770, what does it say, 6, 5? Anyway. So yes, they were vaccinating people in 1770, much earlier than 1796, which is when Edward Jenner supposedly invented the smallpox vaccine. It was a different process, but basically they were taking matter, they were taking the gross stuff that would come out of a smallpox blister and put it into another person, and then the idea would be there would be a less likely chance that that person would die of that disease. So there was a strong reason to do such. And Lady Montagu, the 17th century, I believe, was the first European to discuss this practice, but it had actually been in use in areas where smallpox was endemic for basically forever. So that's Africa and Asia. They had always known of the practice of variolation. And the important thing, I think, from this book, just put it back up here, Pax Americana. The important thing that I got from this book is that it shows that in the 1770s, already they knew that there were different strains of smallpox, and the outcome of the patient who had the variolation procedure had everything to do with the doctor who was administering the procedure. So if the doctor knew what he was doing and he took some of the matter, the blister stuff, the pus from a person who had a mild form of the disease, and he gave it to someone, that person would also have a mild reaction. Whereas if he took it from someone who had a very severe reaction, and gave it to another patient, that patient would have a very severe reaction as well. So they knew, so it wasn't just a blanket thing of smallpox being one illness. It was a wide presentation of symptoms, which is really, really important, because if they wanted to kill someone, for example, like if they want to do the smallpox blankets, they know they're going to use a virulent strain as opposed to a less virulent strain. And there was another very virulent strain of the smallpox, which they say, instead of having blisters all over, your face would just turn black and you would die in 2 days. And we don't hear about that when we're talking about the eradication of smallpox, but I think that if they really wanted to kill 90% of the Native Americans, history shows they basically did, that's what you would use. You would use that very virulent strain. So that's the point of Pax Americana that I would make. And also, just the germ warfare is a lot more than just smallpox blankets. It's also, it's do they or do they not have it? That's an important consideration. And all right, so the next book I have is Lab 257 by Michael Christopher Carroll. And this book has basically been superseded by another book called Bitten that was released in 2018, and the writer of that was Chris Newby. And she's got a confession essentially by this man that we thought was like the hero who discovered Lyme disease, where he's admitting to her and to another person as well that he was working for the United States government. And actually, he doesn't know who he was working for, but he was developing germ agents to be put into the body of a tick. Okay, so Lyme disease emerged from this Lab 257 in the year 1968. And then I believe there was a second outbreak in the year 1975, which is where there was the big kerfluffle about it, and that's where Willy Bergdorfer, the supposed discoverer, got into what actually turned out to be a cover-up. Okay, so Lyme disease, we basically have a confession from the guy who developed it that Lyme disease is a bioweapon which escaped accidentally in the year 1968, and now it's just all around us. And, interesting thing about that, there's a lot of interesting things about Lyme disease, but basically, Lyme disease is like last year's model. Willy Bergdorfer said that he stopped being interested in the development of germ agents or whatever entomology, whatever field he was involved in, because of the development of DNA sequencing and genetic engineering. He said, I'm just too old to learn this kind of stuff. Oh, and also, P.S., he died of Parkinson's disease, which he himself believed was a complication of the Lyme disease that he got from doing these experiments on these animals. So, whoa, poetic justice to say the very least. Moving around, the next book I've got here is Dr. Mary's Monkey, and I just read this. This is about some stuff that happened in New Orleans, so maybe I can just read what it says on the cover there. How the unsolved murder of a doctor, a secret laboratory in New Orleans, and cancer-causing monkey viruses are linked to Lee Harvey Oswald, the JFK assassination, and emerging global epidemics. Writer is a local boy, Edward T. Haslam. So, whoa, yeah, real stuff. And this is all just his investigation. This is none of this. You can fact check everything in this as opposed to what the next book I'm going to bring up. But this is all just his detective work. He determined where this laboratory was. They used a particle accelerator, which is like huge amounts of electricity to bombard cancer-causing viruses with radiation in order to mutate them and put them into more animals, mice in this case, and then monkeys. And then they actually did experiment, according to him, on human subjects, and they developed a cancer virus. So a virus that causes cancer, they developed at Tulane University and through the Ochsner Medical Complex. And it's related to the JFK assassination, but that's way more than I want to get into right now, so I'm just going to bring that up. Edward T. Haslam. But this is just the nature of germ warfare. This is what we're working with. If you have a loved one who has cancer or has died as cancer, you need to read this, and you need to be aware of the information that's in this book. And look at this. This is cool. I found a used copy at just the Goodwill. The Goodwill by my house I just have a strange affinity for. This is the first edition. The one I have was updated, but maybe I'll send this to one lucky viewer. The next one, Me and Lee, this is basically a memoir. So How I Came to Know, Love, and Lose Lee Harvey Oswald is the extended title of this book. So Judith Very Baker, follow her on Facebook. She puts a lot of good information out on Facebook. This is her testimony. So she's got a lot of like pay stubs and things in here, but basically it's you either believe her eyewitness testimony or you don't. And it's just really like, if you want to dig deeper into the whole clandestine laboratory of New Orleans and the JFK assassination, which I've personally never been interested in, this really sheds some light on that. And then she has a second memoir called David Ferry, Mafia pilot, participant in anti-Castro bioweapon plot, friend of Lee Harvey Oswald, and key to the JFK assassination. So this guy was according to her, according to Judith Very Baker, was a CIA agent, etc., etc. He was working in these clandestine laboratories that they set up in New Orleans. And he was also, as a pilot, he was ferrying people back and forth, and he was, he was a kind of like a captain of the CIA, basically. He was a boots on the ground kind of a leader there, organizer. And then this last book that I have is just to show you where this research kind of leads you, and I just happened to find this at Goodwill as well. Wild Bill Donovan, the spy master who created the OSS and modern American espionage, Douglas Waller. So the CIA comes from this. He developed this in the lead up to World War II, and all the books on Wild Bill Donovan are ridiculous and present him in just glowing terms. And he was a very interesting fellow, but he was, I don't think, a hero, by any stretch. But there's a lot to get into there. The point with this book and the point of the life of Wild Bill Donovan as it relates to germ warfare is, first of all, of course, the CIA was involved in creating germ agents during World War II, as was every other intelligence agency. But also, I forgot. Okay. So, sorry. Dr. Mary's monkey. One of the big things here was that most people don't know is that the polio vaccine of 1952, I believe, was contaminated with the cancer virus. So many of the cancers that people are experiencing to this day are as a result of having had that contaminated polio vaccine. It was contaminated with a monkey virus called simian virus 40, so it was the 40th monkey virus, which was isolated from these material that they were using to culture the viruses, and they found that it caused cancer. And they actually, other stuff I've read shows that these people involved knew that it caused cancer, and they were just basically covering up. So one of the big guys in the cover-up was Dr. Alton Ochsner of the Ochsner Clinic here in New Orleans, and he had a press conference where he brought his 2 grandchildren up on stage and inoculated them or vaccinated them vaccine. I hope I said that was the polio vaccine. Yeah, Jonas Salk, polio, 1952. And they both got sick, and the boy died. And that was known as the Cutter incident, so you can look that up. They say that it was a bad batch, but most likely it was the whole thing. Because they're using, I'm not going to get into vaccines there, I really want to. But the thing with vaccines is you gotta, because especially if it's a virus, you gotta grow the virus in something, and that something has to be alive. So whatever you're putting it, the cells. So whatever cells you're growing it in brings with it all of the wild viruses and such as well. So you're culturing what you want to culture, but you're also culturing XYZ, 37, 39, 37, 38, 39, 40 SV40s, and that's how that came about. And then they took it and weaponized it and said, hey, we can kill people on purpose. We can control this. This is great. So Wild Bill Donovan, though, the point about him is he was great friends with Dr. Alton Ochsner, and he was on the board of directors of the American Cancer Society in 1952 at the time of the contaminated release of the contaminated polio virus. So that's just really, really interesting to kind of think about. Why was the former spy master of the United States on the board of directors of the American Cancer Society at a time when this terrible cancer epidemic was beginning? So, there's interesting there. All right, so I think those are all my books. Let me just look at my outline here. Yes. I have one thing to get to here to read from, but I think I'm just going to keep going with my outline here. I hope it works. All right. So, yes, it's a bioweapon. In my opinion, they're all bioweapons. And by that I mean every illness that's affected humankind for the last 100 or so, probably much longer years. And the reason for that is that on one hand, so you have a what do they call it? A reservoir where this virus or bacteria is naturally replicating and causing no damage to the host, and then somehow randomly it jumps host to a different species, and then it causes big problems. Okay, so you have a random process on the one hand, and on the other hand, you have people growing these diseases in a laboratory setting, okay, in a controlled setting for the purpose of infecting people or animals. And they're going from one species to another. They're doing that jump on purpose because they want to increase the virulence. And they start with mice because they're cheap typically, and they move up to monkeys because they're similar to humans. And then unfortunately, it appears they do test on human subjects. Even the United States has tested on human subjects. And so on the one hand, you have a random process, and on the other hand, you have a purposeful process, people doing this on purpose. And the probability of the random happening before the on purpose process, I mean, it's there. They can make mistakes, but we've got to look at this and say, this is the world that we live in. Diseases are caused by people to kill other people. And an interesting point that I would make here is the realization that in the mainstream academia and the media, their theory of everything is basically randomness. It's chaos. That is how things happen in the world, and that is just what we're supposed to expect or understand. And if you say, I want to connect some pieces here, then you're a conspiracy theorist, right? And then dog whistling is the name of that strategy. But I digress. We say, like in the Kennedy assassination, this one guy, first they tried to say he was a communist, but that didn't stick. So then they just said he was a lone nut, okay? So this is what happens. People just go crazy and kill the president, okay? And like Sirhan was the same thing. Then with school shootings, church shootings, whatever kind of mass shooting, it's a thing in the parlance of our times that people do, is they just go crazy and shoot up a school, and we're all just supposed to accept that. And it's dehumanizing for one thing. It gives you a very bad opinion of the human race. I don't share that opinion. But they go on to like science, evolution. Evolution is a random process, right? Big Bang is a random process. It's all random, and it's interesting that they with Christians who espouse like the short what do you call it, young Earth theory, that's totally ridiculous. But then when you look at the evolutionists and the Big Bang people, they're on the other side of it. There's just the when you do the math, you crunch the numbers on how long this process would take, and then you look at how old we think the universe is. There's no way that process could result in the world that we live in. And an example, we just had scientists come out and say something like, it's natural. It's not a bioweapon, right? This is the story we've been told. Scientists are telling us this. And they say, something like, we don't know how it evolved, but we know it's not a bioweapon because that's not how you build a bioweapon. I don't have the source here, but that is basically what they said. And so we don't know how it works, but we know it doesn't work that way. That's not worth responding to, except to say that it's problematic because, we're not supposed to be, us in the civilized Western world, we're not supposed to be developing bioweapons. So how do you know? How do you know how a bioweapon is designed if you're not building them? And then the other thing about that is bioweapons are the cutting edge. They are the thing, okay? So when you're trying to build one of the things you want to do is you want to figure out a way to kill people or to infect people that the other guy hasn't figured out. So when a person says that's not how you build a bioweapon, you just did a good job fooling him into thinking it's natural. Okay, so the longer it takes, to figure out that it's a bioweapon and respond appropriately, the more effective it's going to be in infecting people and being a bioweapon. Okay, so that's basic, obvious. Okay. Anyway, so I'm going to get into just kind of the nuts and bolts of like bioweapon theory here. So bioweapons have been with us for a very long time, and the essential problem of a biological agent, a germ agent, is not, follow me here, is not killing everyone. The problem is not killing everyone, okay? So with the Spanish flu, and we can, I mean, it came from some kind of a hospital setting. Let's just, okay, it's not natural. But in my opinion, the Spanish flu was an accidental release, and it killed a lot of people. It effectively ended World War I, which is a very interesting point that you never read in histories of World War I. You never read about the fact that they ran out of boys to throw at each other, and they had to stop their little game because of this Spanish flu. So in my opinion, they have, my speculation I should say, they have the doomsday weapon many times over, and it's a biological agent, you know, different ones probably. They can't release it because it would kill them as well. And as much as these people love the chaos and randomness, you know, and glorify it, and that's another topic, but they can't operationally use it because it's too dangerous. So what they're basically trying to achieve with bioweapons, since probably the Spanish flu, is a targeted bioweapon, a more controllable bioweapon where they can use it on a certain group of people that they want dead or incapacitated, and be convinced that it won't spread to back to themselves. Blowback, basically, is what they call that. Okay, and there's like toxins like anthrax, which is better for that than Lyme disease, for example. But you know, basically that's what we're working on. We're trying to the point of a bioweapon, the technical limitation of a bioweapon is that it's far too effective, and not that it's not effective. Okay, so to talk about what might be an effective solution to that technical problem, how to target a bioweapon, I have a paper here that I have just printed out a little excerpt from that I'm going to read. The paper is Biotechnology, Genetically Engineered Pathogens. The author is Lieutenant Colonel Joel O. Alnosara of the United States Air Force. And this is Counter-Proliferation paper number 53. It's published by the United States Air Force Counter-Proliferation Center in 2010, and this paper was never classified, so it's always been publicly available. I got this through Joseph P. Farrell's blog, which is GizaDeathStar.com. I highly recommend that source. I'm just going to read through this to get an idea of what we may be dealing with. Binary biological weapons. This bioweapon is made up of a two-component system with independent elements that are safe to handle separately, but when mixed together form a lethal combination. This system consists of a virus, an helper virus, or bacterial virulence plasmid. Hepatitis D is an example of a virus, and B as the helper virus. A combination of both produces severe infection to the host. Hepatitis D needs to infect cells simultaneously with the unrelated virus hepatitis B. Both are primarily transmitted through sexual contact or by contaminated blood or needles. The D virus takes advantage of the proteins expressed by the larger B virus and greatly increases the severity of disease caused by hepatitis B. Infection by hepatitis D alone is not possible. Examples of bacterial virulence plasmids are the plague, Yersinia pestis, anthrax, Bacillus anthracus, dysentery, Shigella dysenteria, and E. coli, Escherichia coli. State of the bioweapon. Binary biological weapons are already in existence. The process of generating this potential bioweapon has been decoded as revealed by a former Soviet Union defector. In 1992, 1992, a defector from the former Soviet Union, codenamed Temple Fortune, described his experience with binary biological weapons. He revealed that the former Soviet Union secretly continued research on a new and improved super plague, Yersinia pestis again, despite President Yeltsin's order to end their offensive biological weapon program. The defector explained that the super plague would not only be more resistant to multiple antibiotics, but it would be made with a special new process. In its initial form, the plague would not be virally handled and stored. Russian scientists had found a way to convert this non-toxic plague back into a deadly antibiotic-resistant form as soon as it was needed for weaponization. It could also be argued that nations who have the equipment, material, resources, and knowledge could very easily produce these genetically engineered pathogens. Binary biological weapons are good candidates for future use because of their benign properties, making them easy to store and handle. Because the components are not independently dangerous or hazardous, they can be easily transported, requiring less signatures for manufacturers. This also makes tracking more difficult. Because of its properties and ability to be stored in large volumes for a long period without causing any harm, it is presumed that Russia still maintains this bioweapon. Future application. The binary biological weapon processes are already known and are here to stay. In the wrong hands, bioweapons are an impending and dangerous threat. So that's from the United States Air Force. All right, I'm going to look at the factions from a theoretical perspective, okay? I'm not going to talk about China versus United States. I think the important thing to note, first of all, though, is that when we talk about factions, we're not talking about a single motivation. So when you talk about the United States, not everyone who works for the United States is on the same team, okay? When you talk about the United States Air Force, not everyone who works for the United States Air Force is on the same team. They don't have the same goals. So even though it's the same organization, the same umbrella, it's different groups of people with different motivations working toward different aims. That's very important to understand because we're taught to believe in this like right versus left, for example, or China versus U.S. I already said, but these things are like fake. They're not what's happening at an operational level. They're not the distinctions that matter to a person who's trying to figure out who's doing what and why. Okay. So the big one that we're all familiar with and that people are believing that this is about is the population control. Agenda 21, Agenda 2030, eugenics, Bill Gates, we're all kind of familiar with this. I don't want to beat a dead horse here, but just for the record, what this comes from is a guy named Thomas Malthus, who was born in 1766, died in 1834, and specifically his essay was called An Essay on the Principle of Population in 1798. And he basically, in this essay, he observed that whereas the population increases geometrically, the ability to feed the population, I think that's arithmetically something. Anyway, you add like one field, two fields, 3 fields, 4 fields, 5 fields, 6 fields, like that in terms of your ability to produce. But then people you add, 2, 4, 16, 256, whatever it would be. And that's the idea that this is based on. That's the idea of, that's why we need to keep the population below 500,000 people, as it says on the Georgia Guidestones. It's a scientific concept, which is false, but it's still people who believe it. So, a lot of them are like baby eaters, and I don't want to use any other worse terminology than that in this video. But a lot of them are good, thinking they're good people who are just really, really worried about the face of the planet, and we're just saying, yeah, it makes sense to sneak a sterilizing agent into a vaccine, for example. Okay, that's that faction. Okay, for purpose of definition, and So the problem scientifically with that was the discovery of DNA and the realization. Well, I'll get to the realization. I'm going to talk about just a little bit about the discovery of DNA. Okay, so this DNA was first isolated in 1869 by a Swiss fellow named Friedrich Miescher, Miesher. And then it was the people who are credited with figuring it out, modeling the structure correctly for the first time, were Francis Crick and James Watson. And that's 1953 is when that happened. So long after the eugenics kind of people had gone into the background. But interestingly, when I was doing research for this little chit chat, I found that both Francis Crick and James Watson were eugenicists, and they were atheists. And I think James Watson had family ties somehow to Charles Darwin. Maybe it was Crick. Anyway, just a really interesting kind of thing. That's their motivation. Also, there's a lot of controversy with the discovery where they seem to have stolen scientific data from another scientist without crediting her. So there's a lot of leeway between 1869 and 1953. There's a lot of time for discoveries to happen that we haven't been made privy to. So that's an interesting kind of thing. But the big event that happened between those years, I'm going to say, for the sake of argument, was World War II. And there is far too much to get into there. But the point I would make is that World War II, especially the end of World War II, is very mysterious. We don't really know what happened. We don't really know what happened to the Nazis, for example, because they didn't surrender. But according to just the mainstream history, the mainstream narrative, World War II was ended by what the Germans call a Wunderwaffen. And that means wonder weapon, the atomic bomb. Okay, and then beyond that, we know that they were going, I mean, you can see all kinds of like History Channel documentaries on UFOs, whatever, all these crazy things that the Germans, and they say only the Germans, right? But, I mean, look into it. They were all kinds of crazy Wunderwaffen that were being developed during World War II. And World War II was a technological war. It wasn't fought on the battlefield. It was fought in the laboratories. So they were telling scientists, you figure this out before the other guy, or the other guy is going to use it to kill your family. So that's the motivation that they're giving scientists doing this work, Manhattan Project, so on and so forth. Okay. And so I just want to, when you're doing research, when you're looking at the documents, the scientific documents that are, papers and things that are published during this time period, I notice basically there's a gap in World War II. So something happened in World War II that I don't know what it is. I have some theories, but something happened where just shit, ground to a halt and things changed. And that's when we developed these two, I don't know, I can't make my hands do what I want, two sets of books, two scientific pathways. And so one is hidden and one is not hidden, basically. One is covert, one is overt. Black budgets, this is when the black budget projects come from. And in terms of the papers, what you read, you have a lot of international collaboration between scientists before the war. And then after the war, on the basis of national security, everything gets locked up. So you used to have, you could write to someone in Germany and say, hey, send me some of your plague bacteria or whatever. I want to do my own research. And now they put a crackdown on that, apparently. And then the other thing is the nature of science, the scientific process, was repetition of experiments. So when I was looking the DNA, Friedrich Miescher, when the guy first when he showed his results to another doctor in 1869, the first thing that the other doctor said is, that's way out there. I'm going to have to repeat your experiments and see what kind of results I get. Okay, so that was the gold standard of scientific research before some point, before some event, was repetition of the experiments to make sure those first experiments were actually valid. And then at some point it changed to what it is now, which is peer review. So a lot to get into there, but I'm going to assume here that further studies into the nature of DNA and effects of the environment thereon did not begin until after 1953. Whether or not that's true, the point is that eugenics was the operating theory up until the development of DNA, when they discovered damage to the human genome, which some of the elites and scientists think is irreparable. So they're not being totally, honest about this. They're not really talking about it every day. They're not getting the fear out about how, like the MTHFR deletion and other just damage to our genome that's passed on to our children. They're not really being honest about that, but it is real. You can look it up. And I don't know if it's irreparable. I personally don't believe it is, but there's a lot of people who do. And so, anyway, this has given rise to a faction of the elite who believe that the human population must be increased as high as possible in order to ensure adequate breeding stock. So I hope that makes sense. Basically, they're worried that we're taking time on our genome is shrinking, and our availability of the genes to do different processes, biological processes in our body is going away, is dying, and we could all die out as a species because of this damage to our genome. And so in order to do that, in order to prevent that, we have to just get as many people just breeding and having babies as possible, so that some of them will have, like, I would use the word harvestable DNA. Okay? So those are the two. We have people who want to kill all but 500,000 people, as it says on the Georgia Guidestones. And then we have people who want to go, like, basically into outer space and colonize all the planets as quickly as possible because they're worried about the genetic damage that we are experiencing as a species. Okay, so back to COVID-19 after we've established the actors, okay? So the big thing, the news that came out recently that really put a lot of this together for me was the ibuprofen connection. So I'm sure, I'm just going to pretend you're familiar with this, but basically, ibuprofen can cause the exacerbation of the symptoms. And obviously, with the paper that I just read an excerpt from earlier, I'm theorizing then that is the other component of the binary weapon, okay? So potentially this coronavirus has been engineered to make us basically allergic to certain drugs, and then when we take that drug, it kills you. It's coronavirus by itself is fine. Ibuprofen by itself is fine. Together, your lungs fill up with fluid and you die terribly, which is why I don't want to joke about this stuff. And again, not a doctor. Listen to your doctor. Anyway, very, very scary stuff, in my opinion. So I just want to say though that it may be as well that they're saying ibuprofen. They're also saying all NSAIDs, which is the class of drug, non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drug that ibuprofen belongs to. And then they're also just reporting anti-inflammatory, so steroids, non-steroidal, as well as steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs have a deleterious effect on the patient's outcome. So that's drugs. So they're saying I'm saying an organism causes a sensitivity to a drug. But it could also be that that organism is causing a sensitivity to another organism. So it could be both. It could be also be that that organism is causing a sensitivity to EMF and the 5G, which a lot of people have said, and other people have said that's a red herring. Um, but the fact is, well, EMF is not harmful. We know that. So you're decreasing your health by exposure to the EMF, and then if you also have it can be a cumulative effect, and that doesn't really need to be engineered either. It's everyone knows that cumulative effects exists there. So you could have a little bit of sickness here, a little bit of sickness there, and you reach a tipping point where you die. It happens. It's reasonable. Um, so when I first read about this, because of my background reading about biological warfare, um, I assumed that every country, for lack of a better word, every country that has a germ warfare program has its own weaponized coronavirus. And they also have spies in Wuhan, China. So the very first day that a patient is admitted to a hospital and tests positive for coronavirus, their spies have a sample of that test. They have the coronavirus sequence. They probably have a sample of the sputum to bring back to their home base. And they say, all right, boys, the name of the game is coronavirus. Bring out your coronaviruses. Okay, so that's my assumption, is that anytime, that's another reason they don't use germ warfare, is it's just as soon as the tops off the can, it's just everybody, germ warfare time. It's kind of like the mutually assured destruction scenario. Excuse me, with nuclear weapons. It's just as soon as one person does it, it gives license to everybody to do it, and so that's why they're kind of like, we can't do this, guys. We have to secretly agree. We're going to use this to frighten our citizens into paying taxes, blah blah blah. But we're not going to actually. There's never been a risk of this, and I personally don't believe that there's ever been a risk of nuclear war either. And that's part of why Kennedy was assassinated, is he was going to reveal that secret. But that's elsewhere. So what they can do then, they have their own coronaviruses, and they would test differently if they were able to do tests with that specificity. But I'm assuming they probably don't at the consumer level, at the hospital level. These tests that they're putting out, these free tests, they might not be able to, or they're probably making sure when they engineer their coronavirus, they're making sure that they test identically. But they can also, and this is a really interesting idea, they can also just use a completely different illness, and then if that illness kills the person and they test positive for the coronavirus, they're going to be reported as cause of death coronavirus. Not only that, but they could just poison the person. And if they're not doing a toxicology screen with the autopsy, in addition to the coronavirus test, then they wouldn't know. They wouldn't assume. And so I do go back to the idea that we all already have coronavirus, which means that does mean that the quarantine, that the shelter in place thing isn't doing anyone good. But I would say, I still support that, and I say don't go outside, don't mingle with people, because first of all, I could be wrong, and I'm, this is just a theory, and I'm not an expert, but I'm just assuming that the nature of the coronavirus, this coronavirus, the NCOV2, was to be disseminated and infect everyone, and give them some sensitivity to some other one or more agents, and then the powers that want to do this can come in and target this population, whereas most people are fine. And so this explains, another thing is they don't have to use their own coronavirus, because that's the other thing about germ warfare and why they don't do it again is, if I take a grenade and I throw it at you, you die. And then the grenade is just smithereens, right? But with germ warfare, if I throw a germ at you, and well, even if you do die, your friend could come up and pick up your infected body and throw it at me. So it's multiplicative. It's one grenade becomes 2 grenades, becomes 4 grenades, becomes 16 grenades, etc., etc. And that's another reason why I don't think that we're going to see a germ weapon kill everyone on planet Earth. I do believe that such germ weapons exist, but I don't. This is why I don't think we're going to see them. Is because it's just wouldn't. I mean, unless it's the end of the world, which I'm not saying it's not. So there's that. But so a supporting piece of evidence I would say to this claim is when. So first of all, one of the indicators that it's a artificial bioweapon attack as opposed to a natural outbreak is you have multiple hotspots. So the 3 hotspots we have are China, Iran, and Italy. And China was there first, and then Iran and Italy were like right away. So what could have happened is, someone who doesn't like Iran, which, we all know who that might be, could be, is they go to Wuhan, they take the Wuhan coronavirus, and they bring it to Iran, and then they say, there you go. And maybe they blow it up and they cook it up. They cook a extra big batch of it just for fun, And I don't know what the motivation would be for Italy necessarily, but I think the motivation with Iran is pretty clear. And like the sanctions, we should not be sanctioning Iran because that's the definition of a pandemic. Is pandemic in one part of the world affects every part of the world. So if a lot of people are dying in Iran, that's making the virus more virulent, and eventually it's just going to spread. If not this wave, then the next wave or the wave after that. You're making the virus happy by sanctioning Iran, and that's what we don't want to do. So it's very curious that we would be doing that, and I think that's another clue that this is a managed event in some way, shape, or form. All right. So what is going to happen with this bioweapon? How long are we going to be dealing with this? I don't know, but for a while. Several months, I would say 3 or 4 months, hopefully, if we get our act together and we are capable of locking it down. And, I mean, it could be a couple months. It could be a lot longer than that. It may have abated in China, so China may be truthful in reporting that their number of cases are decreasing. We don't know because it's China, but let's all hope and pray that that is actually what's going on. My contention would be that it doesn't really matter how long it actually takes because we're never going to go back to normal. The way that things were, the status quo before the coronavirus is donezo. Like the globalism thing, I don't care where you stand politically, that power structure is gone, and the stock market is going to keep falling, okay? It's going to be, and we're into a recession right now, which the last one lasted, the last economic expansion cycle from 2001 to 2008, I want to say. And then so 2008 to 2020, we've been in a downward cycle. So it's the same, that's what they kind of say is like, I don't know, 8 to 11 years is how long it takes. So we're going to expect the next 8 to 11 years is going to be a recession, okay? A depression, buyer's market, whichever one. I'm sorry, not that great of a financial guy, but it's going to take 10 years of decreasing prices and terrible things happening, regardless of what the specific effect of this coronavirus outbreak may be. And I want to emphasize that the 18-month figure that I've read, if you read if you read the full quotes from people who are saying that 18-month time frame, you'll see that it's linked to the development of a vaccine. That's what it comes from. They're saying that it's going to take 12 to 18 months to develop a vaccine. And so that's just a useless piece of information because, I mean vaccines is another issue, but it's not going to take 18 months, okay? And the interesting thing there is the different medications that we're seeing come into play working. Uh, they're making people not want to get vaccines. So that's an interesting effect of this. Is it possible that it was managed for a specific outcome, but it's being managed by another faction for another outcome? I think that's I mean, it's very interesting, obviously, and it's an interesting time to live in. I'm, got my eyes glued to the screen, which is bad for them, as I mentioned. So trying to print stuff out, but yes, I want to respond to a fellow who really kind of got me spooked for a second, and he's Cliff High. So look him up. Look him up on YouTube. I really respect him as a person, and what he has to say. But on this, I think that he's wrong. He's saying that this is the end of the world and like everyone will die. And I don't think that's true. And I think I've laid out my my case for what's going to happen pretty well. What is happening? And the biggest question is just why? Why would they be doing this? Why would they do that? Because if you look up something called the grand solar minimum, which is set to be upon us, global cooling is the reality. We are going to go into what people are calling earth changes. There's a lot of terrible stuff that's going to happen, and I don't know why you need to have a bug on top of that. Okay, earthquakes, hurricanes, tsunamis, shorter crop seasons, shorter growing seasons. A lot of people are going to die because of all of that. And we don't need to have a coronavirus on top of that. We don't need to have a coronavirus, set that off. It doesn't make sense. And I got almost on here, so I got just a few things that I've thought of outside of my outline. I'm going to go into there. Why I think this is not the end of the world. Okay. So first of all, the celebrity infection rate is much higher than the normal infection rate, and that's curious. It could be that it's because they have better access to testing for some reason, but in my opinion, it's actually evidence that something else is going on there. Like I don't know if they're being rounded up, as Q would say. I don't think you should watch movies. That's what I think about that. There's also, as Cliff High mentioned, it's affecting men disproportionately, and it's affecting the elderly disproportionately. And so he's saying, and other people are saying this, that it's designed to take out like military-age men so that we can all be rounded up more easily, or it's designed to take care of, it's designed to take out the elderly because they have the free time to like make YouTube videos and stuff like that, or that they don't work anymore, so that we're out of money and we need to just kill all the people who are old enough to collect Social Security. We need to kill them. That's one theory. And I'm not an epidemiologist, but my understanding is that men typically have weaker immune systems than women. So men are more likely to be affected by infectious diseases, whereas women are more likely to be affected by autoinflammatory conditions, which I have studied quite extensively. And then the other thing is, of course, old people have weaker immune systems in general. So it's another thing where it's a cumulative effect, and it could be and I think it is some sort of a binary weapon, where it's the two things that come together that really kill you. But failing that, it's a mild illness, knock on wood. But if you have a bad diet, if you have underlying health conditions, which they're saying like 99% of the people who have died had, that is all going to play into your prognosis, basically. The other thing that I think is super fishy is the toilet paper. My wife and I recently took a trip to Pensacola right before all this started. We were really cutting it close doing that. And on the way back, we basically stopped in every grocery store and every Walmart that we could find, and they were all out of toilet paper. And they all had a little sign that said, "We're out of toilet paper." But I can't remember how it was worded, but it was kind of like, we do have it, but we're just holding it back. So it's something that's come down from on high to hold it back. There's no genuine shortage, that's for sure. And that might be justified because of hoarding. I don't know. I kind of feel like people aren't the hoarders that the mainstream media tells us we are. But the other thing about that was all these stores that I went to had plenty of paper towels. They didn't have a lot of like the sanitary wipes, but they had some, and they had plenty of Kleenex boxes, tissue paper. So if a real scarcity situation, obviously people would substitute toilet paper with something that would be a substitute for toilet paper. It's just, so the fact that we're only seeing toilet paper gone and we're not seeing food gone is, I think, it's just, it's a sign that things are not all that they are being made out to be. And if you know anything about the elite and the esoteric occult elements of the elite, you know that they like their potty humor. And I'm not going to get into it, but that, toilet paper, we know where we're going. We know where they're going with that. And I think that it could be, another thing that of the factional idea where this one is the globalist faction is possibly being defeated, and this is their last little dig where they're just going to say, yeah, all you do, Americans, is you don't even know how to cook your own food, and all you do is hoard toilet paper because you're so dumb and have bad, bowel movements and hygiene and blah, blah, blah. I think it's very, very, it's a sign, in my opinion. It's an indicator. And then another thing is we're finding so many medications are effective against this disease. So I was really worried about my wife because she has Lyme disease catching this because her immune system is definitely compromised. But then it turns out that so many of the medications that she's on are effective. So azithromycin, doxycycline. She's not on an anti-malarial. She was. But quinine is a very old drug, 1820, I believe, is when it was isolated from tree bark, from cinchona. Maybe you can grow one of those if you live in a warmer climate. So the upshot of that is that, France is giving these drugs away. They are testing people for free, and then if you test positive, they are giving you a dosage of, it was azithromycin and hydroquinone or whatever, it's chloroquinone. So that means that when they come out with the vaccine that we all know is coming, it's not going to be desirable because they're going to know that they have this basically cure for it already. So this just stuff is going off the rails there. Whatever the plan is, whatever the plan is with the coronavirus, things are not proceeding according to it. Easy to say or speculate. And then the secondary note with the medication is, as I mentioned, quinine, 1820. They've known about it for a long time, and it's always been an anti-malarial drug, and a lot, like azithromycin is an antibiotic, but these are old medications that they're just saying, oh, we'll see what it does. And it turns out it has an antiviral effect. So they must have known, therefore, about this antiviral effect for quite some time, and it's only now coming out into the public. And that's just that's a real head scratcher for me. I don't know. Are they losing control of the narrative? Is that what that means? I don't know. So, where is my closing? Here it is. All right. So, in closing, yes, COVID-19 is a bioweapon. There's different competing factions, not a unified new world order in control of the world. It's a dog pile. Everyone trying to get to the top and thinking their ideas are the best, scientifically proven to be the best. That's what these people believe, okay? Because they believe in science. Okay, a lot of people are going to die, but it's their deaths, whether or not you die in this coming time, is going to be a lot. It's going to be dependent on individual behaviors, things you do, your diet. Really, the most important thing is just the research you do, trying to just separate fact from fiction, which is hard, okay? But, hopefully you have friends. Hopefully I'll be your friend. I'm a nice guy. And you can, if you have questions, you can just reach out to me and I'll try to help you through it because I got a lot of time on my hands. I'm just building raised beds and, you know, hatching chicks. Other than that, you know. Okay, so quarantine I do think is justified. And the important thing there is just that I could be wrong about this. This could be way more virulent than I assess it to be. So yeah, stay indoors. Make sure. I hope you've been hoarding for months like I have. But I don't want to kick you if you're down. If you haven't, I just pray for you. But yeah, most important thing: learn, learn, learn. You got time. Use it. Get online and learn just basic science. Not even conspiracy stuff. Learn how viruses work. Learn how bacteria works. Learn about sanitation. Okay, and learn history. That's really, really, really big. Learn the history of how these things have happened in the past, because if you don't know your past, you will repeat it, so on and so forth. And in terms of sources, I brought books because I'm just trying to show you. Number one, I've read a lot of books, and number two, they're expensive. And you might want to give me, if you like what I'm saying, you might want to support me financially because, I'd like to see some return on my investment that I have. But number three is just that's what you should be looking at. Don't read. Don't just watch YouTube videos. I'm on YouTube, but read books. They've been around for a long time. Their information has stood the test of time. So stick to books, and they're easier on your eyes. They don't have the blue wavelength that damages your retina. But sources beyond books and other things like that is your friends and family, okay? Not the media or the academia. Listen to your friends. Have real conversations. You're going to disagree with your friends a lot more than you're probably going to disagree with a talking head on TV because, guess what? A friend is real. And nowadays it's probably just over Skype or something for the next foreseeable future, but you can have fights with that person, and that's uncomfortable. But you know what? If you know how to fact check and you know how to form your own opinions, you don't need to worry about that. You can just say, okay, agree to disagree for now. I'm gonna go find some other sources that say what you're saying or don't. Okay, or maybe what you said is right and what I said was wrong. Jeepers. But media is not your friend, guys. Academia is not your friend, and they are all working. They all have for someone else. They all have a bias, okay? And they're, so it's just very, very sad to see people not be able to converse and to just be on Facebook. And I post things on Facebook, and someone comes to me and says, "Snopes says you're wrong." Beep beep beep. And that's just ridiculous. Okay, that's ridiculous. I'm not going to even respond. I'm not going to get angry. I'm not going to get angry. Okay, I'm just going to not talk to you. You're not going to interest me in conversation if you come up to me and say, you're wrong because Snopes said so. So, all right, this was probably real long. And if you made it through, I congratulate you because hopefully you're a little smarter. And if you have any questions for me, go ahead and email. I'm going to put my email down below. Give me some money if you would like to. If you have money, if you're working from home. I got furloughed, so, credit where credit's due. But talk to your friends about this. Please share, and please subscribe to my channel for more videos like this. All right. Dani Dogg from Mayor out.